sammenkomst. So they invited me to come and talk about my new novel, Nøglen fra Cordoba, The Key from Cordoba. Now, why would I even get into that? When I was in my 20s, my mother, she found this book at the Royal Library, and she handed it to me and said, this is the book about Agent Behrend's life. So this is the life of Joachim Israel Behrend, and the book was printed in 1915. Being 20 years of age, I didn't really care about that. Because when you're 20 years old, you're not looking back, you're looking forward, you have a whole life ahead of you. And so the book just got put away. For some bizarre reason, it made it over the Atlantic and over to America. And I didn't really think about this story at all for many, many, many years. Then COVID hit. And you know how many books are being written during COVID? A lot. Because we couldn't do anything else than sit at home and figure out, scratch our heads, what are we going to do now? We can't go out and be social and all of that. So my sister, she sat down and wrote her memoirs during COVID, and I started writing the story about Israel Joachim Behrend. Now, I will tell you how I got to the title. For following this man through his life and bringing him into reality. But who was Joachim Israel Behrend? And at one time, Sylvia and I lived in Annandale, Virginia. And we were invited, because of Sylvia's work as a Unitarian minister, we were invited to come to a Sephardic Jewish troubadour's house. And this troubadour, her name was Flori Jagoda. And she had gathered all the Sephardic Jewish songs. She actually produced four albums with these songs. And one of the songs was The Key from Spain. And she explained how, I'll get into that a little later, but so she sang this song for us about the key from Spain, right? And she explained how the Jews lost everything when they were kicked out of Spain, but they kept its key. So she wrote a song about it. She passed along a song about this. I'm going to play it for you. So it's the song "The Key to the House in Spain," and it is actually in Spanish, but I translated it into Danish so you all would understand. Okay? Most of you could. Hvor er nu den nøglen til en dør, som åbnede til huset, det hus vi havde før. Vi passede godt på den, en arv til vores børn. Denne nøgle til huset i Spanien. Denne nøgle til huset i Spanien. Sueño, sueño, sueño. That's Spanish and it means dreams. Vi blev jo fortalt, hvor vigtigt nøglen var. Værn nu altid om den, det lovede jeg min far. Jeg gemte den i skuffen, der ligger den endnu. Denne nøgle til huset i Spanien. Denne nøgle til huset i Spanien. Og vore drømme om huset i Spanien. Sueño, sueño. Vore drømme om huset i Spanien. That's how that sounds. So that's how that came about. There was a title to the book. And Next, please. Here we have the expulsion, 1492. Overnight almost, the king decided all Jews must leave, because now it's going to be, Spain is now a Christian country. Have we heard that one before? I think so.
Microphone.
Microphone, yes. Thank you. So all of a sudden 200,000 Jewish families had to leave Spain. And right after that, they had to leave Portugal. So they were just sent away from the Iberian Peninsula. When we were in, Sylvia and I were in Italy just this past June, we also, it's our tradition to visit Jewish cemeteries. And we noticed that some of the tombstones were lying down and some were standing up. And we thought, that's really strange. And I said to my wife, that's probably the Nazis. When they came, they just like pushed the stones down, they tried to destroy as much as possible. But actually later on, when I did some research on it, that was not the case. The case is that Sephardic Jews, they would have their tombstone lying down, and the Ashkenazis, they were standing up. So I felt that was interesting because it's one of the oldest cemeteries in Italy, of the Jewish cemetery. Let's go to the next. So, the two branches of Judaism. Now you have to look at it, this is true cultural aspect of Judaism. It's not like Catholic and Protestants, not at all. It's the same religion, but the two different traditions relating to the geography where the Jews lived. So, on the peninsula, on the Spanish peninsula, and in Yugoslavia and parts of Italy, we had the Sephardic tradition. And in Eastern Europe, we have the Ashkenazi. My wife, for example, she belongs, she's 90% Ashkenazi, 99%, sorry, and from Eastern Europe, and so my lineage goes back to Joachim Israel Behrend, who was Sephardic Jewish. Let's see here, yes. Okay, so in 1783, Joachim Israel Behrend, his mother sent him to Denmark, to Copenhagen, to, as he says, to live a better life, to have a future. Because where they lived in Schwerin, in northern Germany, there was some hardship at that time. The hardship was that a lot of immigrants was coming from Russia. They were all very poor, and they influenced the already there living Jewish people. So Joachim's mother thought we better send him to Denmark to have a good life. So he arrives in Copenhagen in 1783. Yes. And this is a map of Copenhagen. I also have the map lying over on the table so you can look at it afterwards. I find it very interesting because you see here is the city, the fortifications, the ramparts, all the way around. This is Kastellet. And here we have Nyboder, who we all like the yellow houses in Nyboder, but they actually used to be white with red shutters. And it was, of course, built by Christian IV. Here we have government buildings. Here is the Pondens here, where they built the ships and repaired ships and took care of everything from the Navy. Here is the government buildings, the Christiansborg Slot. And just in this little part is where all the people lived. And there was 100,000 people living in those small quarters. Out of those 100,000 people, in 1783, 1% were rich people. 1%. 10% were middle class. Think about that. 90% was poor people, really poor people. And the living conditions were awful. So that when we see movies, the people in romantic clothing and high hats and everything is wonderful, right? It wasn't wonderful at all. They lived crammed together inside these walls. There was no cloacation. Everything was just thrown out on the street, and at night it was pushed into the canals.
Which is probably the water source.
There was no cast iron stoves. Everything was over, even in the buildings, even in the houses. It's amazing to think about that it was so primitive as it was.
How many stories high were they?
They were normally 3 to 4 stories high. It was stuen, første, anden, tredje sal. Yeah. See. Oh, let's go back a little bit. One go back ahead. I want to talk about. See all these square parts here. This is what architecture of Frederick V. He called Frederiksstaden. So that was all going to be new buildings, modern, matching the French Rococo style buildings. So there was not much thought about the people living there. And these here, we have the lakes, the søerne. Pindingesø, Sortedamsø, St. Jørgens Sø. It was actually in the beginning, they were not there at all earlier. It was just like a spring that was running through the landscape. And then they thought, well, we need to have a second defense against an enemy. So they dammed it up and these lakes appeared. So that would be the first protection of Copenhagen when an army would come. And luckily we still have those lakes and they are so beautiful to walk around. Now you can see. This is how it looked inside. I don't know if any of you saw the movie, the Danish series Carlsberg, about the brewer. Yeah, right? That's kind of what, that's how it looked. People at night, they would throw out the night net potter. Kitchen scraps, everything would just be thrown on the street. Dogs would run around unattended in packs of dogs. Once a year, the king would order, tonight we're going to kill all the dogs that don't belong to an owner. And the nightmen, they would walk around, catch the dogs and kill them out on the street. I write about that in the story. Yeah, the next one is great. This is up on the ramparts. I don't know if any of you remember the song Spacertur på volden, Store Bededags nat eller sådan noget. That's where the better off people would walk around on the ramparts in good weather and meet each other and socialize. Because they couldn't do it down on the street. We just saw what it looked like on the street, right? So they had to find a place where they could do that, and that's where they met.
Can you tell a little bit, where is the ramparts?
The ramparts are the voldene all around Copenhagen.
Where the Little Mermaid is that it?
The Little Mermaid, she's over here somewhere.
Okay.
But these are the ramparts,
Okay.
the fortification of Copenhagen. And I just showed you where the big castle, Christiansborg Slot, where it was. Now look at the size of this building, okay? And then think about where people had to live. There was no proportion. So they had this enormous castle, and 1794, it catches fire. And they can't save it, it's just like everything inside, of course, everything is wood, right? And it goes up in flames, and the only thing that was saved from that fire was Ridestaden, where, I don't know what you call that in English, where the horses were practicing, and the houses where the horses were.
Riding
That comes
stable.
in later. That's great that they were saved, because later on I'll tell you what happens. That is the first disaster in where Joachim Israel Behrend, he lives in Copenhagen. That is the big fire in 1795. Now, The only place people could gather was like out on the squares where there was no buildings, right? The heat was so intense in the rest of the city by the canals that people would just jump into the canals and drown, right? It was an absolute chaos during the fire. Luckily, the wind shifted at some point, and the rest of the city was saved. Here we saw, if you can imagine if there's a fire, and this is how the streets they look, right? What are you going to do? So let's take the next one. So this is a picture. It is a much later picture than the story I'm talking about, but I took that picture in my presentation because you can see this house here. Now, what is different about that house? Any bits? Okay, I'll tell you.
What's the truth?
The corner is cut.
Oh, yeah.
The corner is cut off. And if you go into downtown Copenhagen today with all the old streets and all the old buildings, most of the corners are cut like that. And the reason for that, because they learned a lesson when half of the city burned down, is they couldn't get around the corners with the ladders on the fire trucks. So they thought, oh, we better do something about that. So we got to cut the corners, so now they could come around. And later on, that turned out to be great. Yes. So Copenhagen had its streets and the history of each street. My uncle, not my uncle, my great-great-grandfather, he lived in Skinnergade, and later on he had other properties around Copenhagen. That's basically how he built his wealth. He bought and sold buildings. Farvergade, that is, of course, comes from the 1560, the Royal Dye Street, where all the clothing for the uniforms for the army would be dyed. Hyskensstræde, that comes from the German word hysken, which means toilet. So that it kind of relates to that there was a place where people could go and do the thing you do in the toilet. And on that street there was public toilets. So that's why it was called Hyskensstræde. Badstuestræde, that's a good one too. Badstuestræde, that was where the public baths were. And that goes all the way back to the 1400. Around the time of my great-great-grandfather, they were, right after they were closed down because there were a lot of things were going on in those bathhouses, okay? And one of the results of those things going on in the bathhouses, there was a lot of syphilis and was spread randomly. I mean, it was a big problem at that time. And it was not only in Copenhagen, no, it was in, the Germany called it the French disease, the French called it the German disease. And they brought that to America, right? The immigrants, and they got to the Native American Indians and killed them by the thousands. I mean, it was horrible, because they didn't have a cure for it. Then we had Magstræde, which was the street of the prostitutes. 1640 it goes back to them. And then there's Nederstræde, which is the street which is actually has nothing to do with leather. It has to do with, that's where in the Middle Ages the ships would come in and there would be a boardwalk going out and they would unload the ships. But that later became to have the name Nederstræde.
Question?
Yeah.
On the street with the toilets, did they have sewers underground or were they just
No.
like outhouses?
No, there was no sewers in Copenhagen at this time. The way that they did the toilets in where the people were living was in the baggården, in the backyard. So they would come and they would dig a big hole into the ground, cover it with planks, put a little house over it, and that's where you did your thing.
Like
right? And then when it was full, they would cover it over. I mean, unbelievable that people even survived. You know?
Hello?
Okay, let's get the next one.
Another question.
Yes.
Det var jo lokum.
Yeah, lokum.
Det var lokum. Det
Ja.
var altid på gårdene, det var der ude i
Yeah.
haven et eller andet sted.
But the problem is when you have 100,000 people going to the party at the same time without sewage.
That became the lokum. Everybody had a lokum in Denmark when they didn't have a toilet, right?
No, I have to say no, because that's the toilets were dug in the backyard, and from the people that are living in the house, they had to go down and go to the toilet in the backyard. That's how it was. Okay. 1801. I'm so happy that Toves got into the history of losing Norway and all of that. Battle of Copenhagen. Well, Denmark was doing great on the high seas. We had the West Indies Island, St. Thomas, St. Croix. We had colonies on the west coast of India, and in Africa, also on the west coast of Africa. And they brought home immense amount of money. Denmark was involved in the slave trade. They had big sugar plantations on the islands, on the West Indies. And they were doing really well. The biggest houses in Copenhagen was all houses from these merchants that had all this trade going on. And we could do that because we were neutral. We were not really involved with, directly at least, with the war between Britain and France. But the Brits, they put a tighter and tighter squeeze on the Danish handelsflåde, on the shipping industry and merchant fleet in Denmark. And they began to take the Danish ships, and when they come from the Western Island, or for example, they would take a ship and bring it to England and take everything that was on the ship. So the economy was getting disrupted. And the British, they thought, well, Denmark has so many warships, we don't want France to get these ships. So we're going to go and see what we can do. So they attacked Denmark in 1801. And there's a horrible battle outside of Copenhagen. It's a wonderful event where people, they come down with their lunch boxes and wine and beer, and they're all, looking, we're having a battle, we're having a sea battle out there. And they're like shouting hurrah, and there are flags in all the windows, and it's just like this big show. And the Danish fleet was really not ready for a fight like that. So
I have a question. How many days does this go on?
It was all basically on one day.
In one day?
Yes, it was one day. It was like within 8 hours, and then it was all over. Yeah. Yes. So the Danes, they fought bravely. It was an absolutely horrible affair. Most people would get injured not from the cannonballs themselves, but from when the cannonballs hit the wood, hit the ships, all the wood would splinter, and it was just a horror scene. I have yes, there was 260 Danish sailors killed and more than 800 wounded.
Wow.
But after 4 hours, the Danes could see that they couldn't manage it. There was too much. The Brits were too strong. They were much more trained in warfare than the Danes were. They could load their guns twice as fast, and shoot just as fast. And they had more guns on each ship than any Danish ship had. So that didn't go well for the Danes. We had to give up. Yes. And where did we take all the wounded? Well, they were most of them taken to Frederiks Hospital which was in the new part of the city. And you can still walk down Rødgade and see the same building, it's still there. The hospital is now a museum, but it's very interesting. It was the first public hospital in Denmark and part of the new Frederiksstaden. And if you look at the buildings, you can see the likeness to Amalienborg, right? And to Grundtvigskirken also. They didn't have nurses as we know it today. They didn't have a nursing program. They did have doctors that had gone to the university and learned as much as they could at that time about, being a doctor, doing medicine. But the nurses were women that they hired from the countryside, big, strong women they needed to take care of the patients. So they would come in and most of them lived in the hospital. They would cook, they would clean, they would do everything. So it was very hard work for these women. Yes? Another disaster strikes. That's only 7 years later. That's the attack on Copenhagen. And of course, it has a chapter of that in my book also. Over 1,000 buildings were set on fire and destroyed in that attack. And it was the first time that a city had been bombarded with rockets. People had never seen rockets before. All of a sudden, during this bombardment, they see all these dragons, they call them, dragon tails coming in, landing on the roofs and setting the houses on fire. Just to get you a kind of a, why did the British do this? Well, they wanted again to make sure that Denmark was not going to recover from the last battle 7 years ago. We're going to make sure this time that there's going to be nothing for Napoleon. And they could do it because some of you would ask, well, why didn't the Danes fight back? Why didn't they fight the British when they landed in Vedbæk? Well, they couldn't because the whole Danish army was down at the border to Germany. Because the king thought, oh, I don't want the Germans to come up through Jylland or whatever, any army that is fighting each other, we're not going to deal with that, so we're going to put the army down there. He thought, well, Danny and all that thing. Eh? But that didn't work because the British, they came to the other part of the country. And to give you an idea of how strong the British were, there was 5,000 regular soldiers. The British forces involved in the bombardment included about 400 ships and transports with 25,000 sailors. That was a little more than Denmark could handle. After all, we were not as strong at all. Next one. So all of a sudden we don't have any ships anymore. Now what does that mean? That means that we couldn't get anything back from the colonies, and at the same time the British, they closed down the Danske Sejlskole. They took it over. And when they left Copenhagen, they took everything they could find. I mean, they took the pews out of the church at Castellet, for example, and they just stripped the nation for everything. So there was nothing left now. How are we going to continue to fight the British? Well, the gunboats were the answer. So the rich men in Copenhagen, they supplied the king with silver and cash to pay for the formation of gunboats, which kept the British battleships at bay. And Joachim Israel Behrend, he donated, next one, please. No, go back. Thank you. So Joachim Israel Behrend, he donated $139, which is about 2 kilos of silver to the king, so that they could build these gunboats. And so did all the rich people. They contributed that we could continue to defend at least Denmark. We also, at the same time, we lost Norway, and we went from, as Tove put it, we went from being a rich country and a kind of a big country to all of a sudden we're a very small country, and the economy is in tatters, it's ruined. So life goes on. In the wintertime, the poor people don't have wood to their stoves. They can't afford it because, as I mentioned, 90,000 people were poor. They were fighting over bread, and this was a really difficult situation for Denmark, the time right after these two wars. So what do people do? Well, they go outside the city to just breathe. And one place that they go is out to Frederiksberg, where I was born. And this is Frederiksberg Rundkirke, the church where I was baptized. You see it here in an original copper print, I think that's called. And here's the old parish house where I went to Sunday school. So I'm very, very connected to this whole, not only to the city, but to the place, Frederiksberg, where I grew up. And they had it in Dutch style because the king invited a lot of Dutch farmers to come out and farm on the fields of Frederiksberg, around Frederiksberg. Yes. And this is where people went to have fun, because there was no space for that inside the city walls. So they had to go outside, and they went out to Frederiksberg. And that's where there was the singing tents, where women would sing burlesque songs, and there was bands playing on the street, and there was jugglers, and so this all happened outside of Copenhagen, på Frederiksberg. And in the picture to the left, you see the building that my great-great-grandfather, he bought out on Frederiksberg, and it was called Alleenberg. And it was actually, first it was owned by in Moore, what's that called in English? A Moorman in Moore? No,
A mason.
a mason, yes, a mason. So he bought it from him, and that became his summer residence. So in the summertime, Joachim, he would take his whole family out there, and they would spend the summer at Frederiksberg. That's also the place he was during the bombardment of Copenhagen. When I grew up, this house did no longer exist. But this restaurant exists, and it has this old sign, Alleenberg, over it. And so I grew up thinking, oh, that must have been where my great-great-grandfather's house was. But that's not the case, because this is on Pilali, and over here you have Frederiksberg. So they loved that old name, so they just put that on their restaurant. And I think that's very sweet. I went there for dinner, and it was spectacular. Really good food. So Alleenberg was further down on Frederiksberg. And next picture, please. And this is on the spot where my great-grandfather's house was. And that is, of course, the monument over the French school, the French Catholic school, where the nuns were teaching the kids, that was bombarded by mistake by the British bombers when they came to bomb the shell building. Unfortunately, a lot of children were killed, and why I show that is because, again, that connects me, my love for my neighborhood where I grew up, and it connects me with my great-great-grandfather. So I grew up looking at this monument. Every time my sister and I and my mom would walk to Frederiksberg Garden, we would walk by there, and as kids we were really scared, just like, that must be horrible, right? And of course we got this story. So, yes, the next. That is the entrance to Frederiksberg Garden, and it is completely unchanged till this day. This picture is almost like 200 years old, right? When it looked like this. To the left, this building over here. This is Fasanborg. That's where the king, he raised pheasants to shoot and to hunt. And it was first at the very end of the 17th century that they opened the garden for the public, that everybody could walk in and enjoy the garden. Yes. And here we have it, Frederiksberg with Frederick VI, who stood father to my great-great-grandfather's children. And he did that, I forgot to tell you that, when my great-grandfather, when he gave all the silver to the king said, well, in response, and I will be father to your children, with one condition: they had to become Christians. You know, the king didn't want that his kids should grow up and be Jewish. But that was very normal at that time. If the king said that, then you just did it. Except for Joachim never himself became a Christian, and his oldest daughter also kept her faith. But the rest of the family, and his wife did not change her faith. But all the children all became Christians at that time. And they were actually, baptized in Frederiksberg in that one church we just saw. So, here we have a very different Frederiksberg than it originally was, because originally it was laid out like the French
Versailles.
Versailles, exactly, like the garden in Versailles, all straight lines, and then the cultural influence from Britain made the king say, well, we need a more kind of lively thing, we need something more cozy, we need something more mysterious. So that's how Frederiksberg was completely rebuilt. And there you see they had a waterfall. They actually just installed a waterfall in the garden not too many years ago. It's not that spectacular, but it's still, water coming out of the cliff. The king, up here on the hill, then we have Frederiksberg Slot, right? Frederiksberg Castle. And here's the king sailing around on the canals after it's all restored, and it's all nice and lively and hyggeligt. And the people, are on the side cheering him on. There's our king, Frederick VI, and with all his Hof, right? But because of his policies and the disaster that not just had been through, the people used to say, well, one day he steered the boat right into the side of the canal. And they say he's just as bad as sailing a boat as he is running the country. that was the saying. But that is at the place, Frederiksberg Garden, where my sister and I, we were playing as children. And I'm just so connected and in love with that place that that is what, in a way, writing the book gave me the chance to relate to my childhood and to the places in Copenhagen that I love so much. And that I could weave into the story about this immigrant, this Jew that came to Copenhagen with nothing and ended up being the third richest person in Copenhagen, right? I mean, that's an amazing journey he was on. To this day, you can pay a couple of bucks and they will row you around in the canals. It's very sweet. And this is a picture of St. John's Spring in Keeping. Well, we all know that in Catholic times in Denmark, there was all these saint springs around that even dates back to the heathen times before Christianity. They were healing waters. People believed in it, and you know how it is. If you really believe in something, sometimes it works. And this is where the sick went in Keeping, which is down on Falster. And in the novel, Joachim's third wife, she takes a journey down there to bring healing water to Joachim. And at that time, this is around 1818. Keeping was a little town by the water, by the ocean. When I was a kid, the family would go to Falster for a summer vacation, and we would go to Keeping because it's a very beautiful church. And there was just fields all around. You know, I had no idea that it once was by the ocean. But what do you call it? Boat, what's a boat? What's the word for boat?
What is it?
The sound, maybe? You could call it that? Okay, the sound was dammed up, and now it's fields and it's farming. But back then, the fishing boat could come right in to keeping. I think those are the small things that you get to explore and to when you do a research on a book, right? Specifically historical research, it just blows you away. The things that you never knew that from that place where you grew up. Yeah, next one. Yes, we talked about the terrible economic situation. The king and his entourage were still up at the castle, partying, spending money like crazy, and outside the castle, the people were really in a bad shape. And you know how it goes when people are in a bad shape, then they have to find somebody to blame everything on. And some people from Germany came up and started spreading the rumor that the Danish Jews were the cause of all the evil in Denmark and in Copenhagen. So they wanted to get rid of the Jews, right? So they put a poster up on Børsen, the old Christian building, said, you know, Jews are scum, let's get rid of them, right? Now, the king, however, having received so much support from the Jews over the years of hardship, he said, no, it's not the way we are in Denmark. So he called on the troops, on the guards, on the police to stop the riots. Because people were walking down Købmagergade, smashing all the windows on the Jewish stores, and beating people up on the street. Luckily, I didn't kill anybody, right? That's wonderful. But they really showed this hatred against a specific group, which was indeed very unfortunate. And my great-great-grandfather was at the end of his life, and that basically took him over the last, you know, he didn't live to see how it was afterwards. But, yes. So he was buried as a Jew in a Jewish cemetery in Møllegade, and his second wife is buried right next to him. His tombstone can still be seen, and his second wife's. If you go and you look at the register at the cemetery, his stone is still there. And it's my hope that one day I can go to that cemetery and take a picture of the gravestone myself. So I want to thank my great-great-grandfather for giving me that story. And it is fictive history. It is all the historical facts that I write about in the book are true. Okay? So the frame, I kept the frame from this old guy here. But I wanted to bring him to life. I wanted to give Joachim a life. And so when people read the story, they can relate to a real human being. He wasn't just a good guy, and he wasn't just a bad guy. He was just an immigrant coming to Copenhagen, trying to get the best out of his life. Just like a lot of you and myself came to America to try and get a better life, right? Or at least to get a good life. So, thank you, Joachim, and thank you for listening to my story. And I have books with me of the novel, and I have other books and CDs, and you can talk to my wife about all the money stuff, okay? So, any questions?
I wanted just to add a point about the Jews. I believe, and I don't know at what point this happened, but the Jewish people in Denmark were citizens.
What's what?
The Jewish people in Denmark are citizens.
Yes.
As opposed to the Dutch people or any other Jews, but the Jews are Danish.
Yes,
That's a big difference.
yes.
And maybe we treated it different because
Well,
of that.
and they were also under King Frederick VI, they were for the first time also treated as citizens.
Yeah, because they're
And
ancients.
that's why the Jewish people are very thankful to him for that.
Very much, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
So I just want to know if you put any of those pictures in the book.
What do I have?
Did you put any of the pictures that you showed?
I did not.
Oh.
No. Sorry. Yeah.
The buildings that we see on the streets in Copenhagen, they look just like they look today.
Yeah.
Are they the same? pretty
Yes.
much?
Yes. They are very much the same, and it's still cobblestone streets. And the wonderful thing about going and visiting Copenhagen is, if you go downtown, in the middle of the old part of the city, there's hardly any people. You know, they're all out in the surroundings of Copenhagen. But downtown, you can really walk around and get the feel for, wow, this is where I come from. And for me, Copenhagen that's my city, that's my home, that's my love. And I hope that shines through in the history, in the book, yes.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about the biography that your mom introduced you to when you were 20.
Okay.
Because it's such a small little volume.
It's very small.
But so impactful to your family.
Yes.
I mean, to me, it's kind of amazing that even was found, right? You know,
Yeah.
as a librarian, I appreciate
Yeah,
when, there's good indexing there.
yes. And the original actually is to be found in the Royal Library
Yeah.
still. Yeah.
Yeah. But how do you know how your mom learned of it?
My mom wasn't into that at all. You know, because that is my Sephardic, line back to the Sephardic Jews are through my father.
Okay.
And my father and mother, they didn't like each other very much. So,
Well, that makes sense.
But
Yeah.
I think my mom was thinking, well, he really should know where he come from, right? That part of the history of the family, yes.
But how did she become aware of? Did your mom, your dad tell her?
Yeah, my
about
dad
that?
must have told her about it.
Okay.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because to me, it's like I find it fascinating when you look at family histories and genealogy, and
Yeah.
it isn't always easy
No,
to trace
it's not.
that.
It could also be that my father, he came across, because he had a bookstore up in Frederiksberg Castle. He was a bookstore for the cadets that were and still are being educated up on Frederiksberg Slot. And so I played up there as a little kid all the time. And I know all the secret tunnels and all the stuff, in that castle. Yeah, it's very cool.
Hey, but you might mention for those who don't read Danish that it is
Yes.
currently being translated into English.
Yes, it is being translated into English by Lucas, what's her first name?
Melissa.
Melissa, thank you. By Melissa Lucas, thanks to Brighton, who kind of guided me in that direction. So yeah, it will be out probably, I would think, in the spring in English. I'm not rushing it because rushing is not good when you are writing a book. Yes, right.
What's the difference between the two different directions?
Well, there really is, there's no religious difference.
I know, but
Yeah. Oh, it's mostly in the tradition, in the way, for example, the Seder that is celebrated every spring, right? Where the Jews celebrate the Seder table. So the Sephardic, they have some different prayers. A couple of different things. For example, they wave the bread over the head of the participants, when they bless the bread, and the prayers are a little different, but it's not at all like two religions. It's the same religion. It's just cultural differences. And there's also the language, Ladino, comes from the Spanish Jewish language. Yeah. Any other questions?
Do you know how the Sephardic Jews came to be in Yugoslavia? Did you mention that they were?
Yeah, well,
Because I always associated them primarily with the Iberian Peninsula.
when they were kicked out in 1492,
Right.
a bunch of them, a lot of people went that way, and to
Okay,
Greece,
got it.
and
got
to
it.
Italy.
So it was after the
Yes.
expulsion. Okay,
Yes.
got it, thank you, because I'm like, I don't know about this.
Right. Actually, my grandfather, it's told in the book, he actually relates more to the Portuguese Jews. But you know, the Jews were also thrown out of Portugal. So that's the fictional part. I said, well, let's say Cordoba, because it could be any of those cities that they came from.
Yeah.
And because he was Sephardic, he could actually enter Denmark because of Christian IV. He had made a special allowance that Jews of the Sephardic tradition were welcome in Denmark. So, yes.
Yeah, a lot of them wound up in Suriname, the Dutch part of South America, and the Yoruba Savannah, all Jewish-owned plantations.
Yes,
And they had full citizenship.
that's right.
Yeah, it was considered the Jewish capital of the New World.
Yes, that's correct. That's why you mentioned that, because I was just reading about that, about Spinoza and his family. Yes. Well,
Any other questions for Flemming? It's been great.
Yay, Flemming.
yeah, you had one.
I just want to thank you for summarizing
Okay.
this extensive story. You brought it into focus in an easy way to understand. I want to thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening. I really appreciate that. Thank you.